Billionaire CEO refused all women from touching him. Then woman who broke him came back. For 20 years, Henry Blackwood, billionaire, CEO, and once broken by love, refused to let any woman close. But then she came back. Amelia Voss, the only woman who ever broke his heart, the one he thought he'd never see again. Now, after 2 decades, she's standing before him, more powerful than ever. And this time, she's not just trying to win him back. She's trying to claim Blackwood Enterprises. But Henry isn't the same man she left behind. And beside him stands Sophia Carter, the woman who shattered every rule he once lived by. Will Amelia succeed in breaking down the walls Henry spent years building? Or will she discover that he belongs to someone else now? Is it too late for love? Can the past truly be undone? Find out in this intense, emotional journey of betrayal, power, and second chances. Like, comment, and share if you believe that true love can withstand the test of time. Henry Blackwood stood at the head of the boardroom table, his gaze sweeping over the gathered shareholders, his mind sharp and calculated. The multi-billion-dollar empire he had built over 2 decades had made him a force to be reckoned with in the business world. A man who had once been broken by love was now untouchable, his heart encased in the cold steel of control. For years, Henry had avoided intimacy, keeping his personal life locked behind walls he built himself. After losing the only woman he had ever loved, Amelia Voss, he swore he would never again let anyone close. Not a lover, not a friend. He had been betrayed once, and the scars ran deep, more painful than any business deal or corporate rivalry. Yet here he was, the powerful CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, surrounded by the finest in the industry. And as the meeting began, he felt the weight of the past settle into his chest when he saw her, Amelia Voss. It had been 20 years, 2 decades since she had left him shattered, abandoned without so much as a goodbye. 2 decades since she had made the decision to choose ambition over love, making a business deal that shattered everything they had built together. Amelia had been his everything, his confidant, his lover, his partner. She was the one woman he had trusted, the only person he had ever truly opened his heart to. But now she was back, standing at the door of the conference room like a ghost from his past, her presence cutting through the air like a dagger. Amelia was still as stunning as ever, her blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, her eyes sharp and calculating, her every movement exuding power. The years had only enhanced her allure, transforming her into the formidable woman who now commanded attention from anyone in her presence. Henry's heart skipped a beat, a rush of memories flooding his mind. Memories of the late nights they had spent together, dreaming of their future. The way she had made him feel alive, the passion they had shared, but those memories were tainted now. They were laced with the pain of betrayal. And seeing Amelia again brought all those feelings rushing back to the surface, threatening to undo the careful control he had maintained over the years. Amelia's eyes locked with his, and for a moment the room seemed to disappear. There was only Henry and Amelia, 2 souls tied by a past they could never forget. She hadn't aged a day in his eyes, her presence still as commanding as ever. The years had not dulled her fire. But Henry was no longer the same man she had left behind, no longer the man who had been willing to give her everything. He was different now, hardened, scarred, and unyielding. The man who had loved her with all his heart had been replaced by a man who had learned that love was a dangerous game. Behind him, in the quiet corners of the room, stood Sophia Carter. She had been his assistant for the past 3 years, a woman who had entered his life unexpectedly and changed everything he thought he knew about love. Sophia was unlike anyone Henry had ever known. Where Amelia had been cold and calculated, Sophia was warm and empathetic. Where Amelia had taken control, Sophia had gently offered him the space to heal. She had given him something he hadn't realized he needed, the freedom to love again. As Amelia stepped further into the room, Henry's gaze flicked briefly to Sophia. He saw the tension in her posture, the way she was watching Amelia with a quiet intensity. Sophia had seen the way Amelia had impacted him in the past. She knew the history, the weight of the hurt that still lingered in Henry's heart. Sophia had been the one to help him pick up the pieces when he had fallen apart after Amelia's betrayal. And now she could see the old wounds being reopened, the scars that had never fully healed. Amelia was no longer the woman who had once been the center of Henry's world. She was an outsider now, a woman trying to reclaim what had been lost, both in love and in power. But Henry had no intentions of giving her that power again. The man he had become was someone who had learned to trust only in himself. As Amelia approached the table, her voice cut through the tense silence. "Henry," she said, her tone cool, but with a hint of something deeper. She wasn't here just to apologize. She was here for something more. She was here to take back what she had lost. Henry didn't answer immediately. He studied her with a calm, detached gaze, trying to suppress the memories, the emotions that had begun to resurface. But the truth was undeniable. Amelia had broken him in ways no one else could understand, and now she was trying to worm her way back into his life, just as she always had. "You're back," Henry finally said, his voice low but controlled. "I didn't think I'd see you again, not like this." Amelia took a step closer, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I never thought you would be so easy to forget, Henry." She paused, letting the weight of the words hang in the air, before continuing. "But it seems you've done well for yourself. Too well." The undercurrent of bitterness in her voice didn't go unnoticed. Henry's jaw clenched slightly, but he didn't respond. He wasn't going to let her provoke him. He had no interest in revisiting the past. Not now, not ever. "I'm here for a reason, Henry," Amelia said, her gaze not leaving his. "You know what's at stake. The merger, Blackwood Enterprises, it's not just about power anymore. It's about survival." Henry's eyes darkened and he straightened in his chair, his posture shifting into something more commanding. "I know what you want, Amelia, but things have changed." He looked briefly at Sophia, who was watching him, her eyes steady, unwavering. He wasn't alone anymore. "I've made my choices, and I'm not interested in reopening old wounds." Sophia met his gaze, and for a moment there was a silent understanding between them. She knew what Amelia had meant to him, but she also knew that Henry wasn't the man he used to be. The man who had once allowed Amelia to control him was gone, replaced by someone who had learned the value of trust and loyalty. And Sophia had become his anchor, the one who kept him grounded in a world that often felt like it was spiraling out of control. Amelia's lips curled into a smile, one that was more a challenge than a greeting. "You think it's over, Henry? You think you can just walk away from me? From us?" Henry met her gaze with cold resolve. "I don't need you anymore, Amelia, and this time I won't be the fool you left behind." The stage was set for an explosive reunion between Henry and the woman who had shattered him. But this time the stakes were different. Henry had everything to lose. Blackwood Enterprises, his empire, his future. But it was Sophia, the woman standing by his side, who made him realize that some things were worth fighting for. As the meeting continued, it became clear that the game had just begun. Amelia might have been back, but this time the rules were Henry's to set. The battle for his heart and his company was on. Would Amelia reclaim what she had once broken, or would Henry prove that love was not something to possess, but to be shared with someone who truly understood him? The past was about to collide with the present, and only time would tell if it would break or build the future. Do you believe in second chances? Can the past ever truly be forgiven? Like, comment, and share if you think true love deserves to be fought for. Section 1. The Return of the Past. Henry Blackwood's fingers drummed absently against the polished surface of the conference table, his gaze flicking over the quarterly reports spread before him. The room was filled with the usual faces, sharp, intelligent, and business-minded. It was a meeting like any other, a routine filled with numbers, proposals, and forecasts. But there was a strange undercurrent in the air today, one that he couldn't ignore, no matter how hard he tried. The door opened quietly, a soft click as it latched behind the newcomer. Henry's eyes didn't lift immediately, his mind already preparing for whatever corporate pitch was about to unfold in front of him. But then, he heard the familiar voice. Henry. It was just one word, but it hit him like a jolt of electricity. He didn't need to look up. He could hear the distinct tone. The same cool, confident timbre that had once made his heart race and his stomach churn with both desire and dread. Amelia Voss. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Henry's body tensed involuntarily, the memories flooding back in a blur. Her laugh, the way she used to run her fingers through her hair, the fire in her eyes when she spoke of her ambitions, and then, of course, the betrayal. He had never allowed himself to forget that day, the day she had torn his world apart for the sake of a business deal that had promised her everything. She was here, standing in front of him, as if no time had passed, her presence as commanding as ever. Amelia had walked back into his life after 20 long years, and Henry knew that whatever came next would alter everything he had fought to rebuild. The room grew still, the air thick with the tension of the moment. He could hear the soft shuffling of papers, the low murmur of voices from the other executives, but none of it mattered. All that mattered was Amelia, standing there in the doorway, watching him, waiting for his response. Henry slowly lifted his eyes, his gaze locking with hers across the room. The woman who had once been everything to him, the woman who had betrayed him, and now the woman who was... Amelia was as stunning as he remembered, though there was a sharpness to her now, something colder than before. She no longer looked like the woman who had shared her dreams with him in the quiet moments of their love. Now she looked like a businesswoman, a force to be reckoned with, someone who was no longer interested in mere romance. Amelia had come for something bigger than that. "Amelia," Henry said, his voice smooth, betraying nothing of the emotions churning beneath the surface, "I didn't expect to see you here." Amelia took a step forward, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor, the sound like a death knell in the quiet room. She was dressed in a tailored black suit, every inch of her exuding authority and power. She wasn't the woman he had once known, the woman who had laughed and loved freely. Now she was a businesswoman, and Henry could see it in every move she made. "I'm here on behalf of Armitage Group," she said coolly, her voice like velvet, smooth and calculated. "I'm representing them in a bid to acquire Blackwood Enterprises." Henry's breath caught in his chest for a fleeting moment. Of course, she was here for the company. After all these years, Amelia hadn't come back to repair the broken pieces of their past. She had come back to take what she felt was rightfully hers. His jaw clenched imperceptibly. He had suspected this moment would come eventually. The merger talks, the shifting of power in the business world, the new players in the game. But he hadn't expected her. Not like this. "I see," he said, forcing himself to maintain his composure. "And I assume you're aware that Blackwood Enterprises is not for sale." Amelia's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile, one that sent a chill down Henry's spine. She had always been a master of control. "I am," she replied, her tone soft but unyielding. "But I'm also aware that sometimes people make decisions they never thought they'd make, and given our history, I thought you'd at least hear me out before you shut me down." There it was again, that dangerous familiarity in her voice. The woman who had once known him better than anyone, who had broken him and left him to pick up the pieces. "Henry," she continued, her eyes never leaving his, "we both know that Blackwood Enterprises has been underperforming. The market has changed, and with the right guidance, the right leadership..." She paused, letting her words linger. Blackwood could become more than just a family legacy. It could be a global powerhouse. Together, we could make that happen. Henry's heart hammered in his chest, though his exterior remained unchanged. He had heard this pitch 1,000 times before, and each time it came with the same baited promise. More power, more wealth, more control. But it wasn't about the company. It never had been. It was about her. Henry's thoughts flashed back to the past, to the years they had spent together laughing, dreaming, making plans for a future that would never come. He had trusted her with everything, with his heart, his dreams, his entire being. And in return, she had betrayed him. She had left him for something bigger, something that had cost them everything. He felt a deep ache in his chest. A part of him wanted to reach out, to take back the pieces of the life they had once shared. But the other part of him, the part that had survived her betrayal, refused to let his guard down. That man was gone. "I'm sorry, Amelia," Henry said, his voice unwavering. "I don't work with people who've betrayed me." The words were harsh, but they were the truth. Amelia's presence, as powerful and alluring as it was, could never erase the damage she had done. Amelia's expression faltered for a brief moment, a flicker of something Henry couldn't quite place crossing her features. Regret? Sadness? Or was it something more dangerous? Anger? But then, in the blink of an eye, she regained her composure, her cold smile returning. "I see," she said softly, her voice betraying no emotion. I thought you might say that. She paused, studying him, her eyes narrowing slightly. But I want you to know, Henry, that some things never change. And such as what? He asked, his tone sharp. Power, she replied, the word hanging in the air like a challenge. It always wins in the end, and if you think you can keep running from it, you're only fooling yourself. Henry stiffened, but before he could respond, the room suddenly felt heavier. He glanced over at Sophia, who was standing silently by his side. Sophia Carter, the woman who had stood by him through the worst of it, the woman who had helped him rebuild when he thought there was nothing left. She had become more than just his assistant. She had become the one person in his life who had proven that not all love came with strings attached. Sophia's gaze was steady, unwavering, as she looked between him and Amelia. She knew what this meant. She had seen the way Henry had reacted to Amelia's presence. She had seen the old wounds start to resurface. But unlike before, Sophia wasn't afraid. She wasn't intimidated by Amelia's power or her beauty. Sophia knew Henry, perhaps better than anyone else, and she could see it in his eyes. The past was coming back to haunt him, but this time he wasn't going to let it win. Amelia Voss had returned to claim what she thought was hers. But this time, it wasn't just the company she would have to fight for. It was Henry's heart, and he wasn't sure he could afford to give it to her again. The battle had begun, but Henry wasn't alone anymore, and as the tension in the room grew thick with unspoken words and past betrayals, one thing became clear. The woman he once loved might have returned, but she would never have him again. Would Amelia walk away, or would she be forced to face the consequences of the choices she had made? Session 2. The game begins again. The tension in the boardroom had dissipated as Amelia Voss took her seat across from Henry Blackwood, her eyes never leaving his. The meeting had continued, but for Henry, the words being exchanged were little more than background noise. He could feel the weight of Amelia's gaze on him, and despite himself, he was reminded of the woman she had once been in his life. She was no longer the soft, vulnerable woman he had fallen in love with. No, Amelia had transformed over the years. She was sharper now, more calculating, a woman who had learned that emotions only got in the way of achieving her goals. And yet, despite the years and the cold distance between them, Henry couldn't shake the feeling that the past was alive in the room with them, waiting to strike. After the meeting concluded, Henry lingered by the window, his back to Amelia, the city skyline before him. The view was always the same: buildings, traffic, a world full of people chasing power, wealth, and security. It had been his world for so long, a world he had built from nothing. Yet when he thought about that world now, he couldn't help but feel it was incomplete. It was only when Amelia's heels clicked sharply behind him that he turned around. She stood just inside the door, her stance bold, as though the years had not dimmed the influence she once held over him. The change in her was clear, but so was the glint of something old and familiar in her eyes. Something he could never forget. "You still haven't changed, have you?" Henry said, his voice distant but tinged with a quiet intensity. Amelia smiled, that same smile that had once captivated him completely. "And you still think you know me, Henry?" she replied, her tone almost too sweet, the kind of sweetness that always masked her true intentions. "But you don't. Not anymore." Henry narrowed his eyes, a hard edge creeping into his expression. "I don't need to know you, Amelia. Not the way I used to." Her smile faded, and she stepped closer. "I see. And yet, here you are, still letting me occupy space in your head. 20 years, Henry. That's a long time to pretend you're unaffected by me." He exhaled sharply, tension filling the room. "What do you want, Amelia?" She studied him for a moment, as if weighing her words carefully. "You and I both know what I want. I want what's mine." Henry's expression remained impassive, though his jaw clenched at the implications of her words. What she wanted wasn't just the company. That was the part of her that Henry had always struggled to understand. The part of her that cared more about status, about power, than love. She had sacrificed everything for that power once before. He wouldn't let her do it again. "You left me once," Henry said, his voice laced with a bitter truth. "You made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences. Blackwood Enterprises, my life, none of it's for you anymore." Amelia didn't flinch. Instead, she took another step forward, her heels tapping softly against the floor. "I never wanted Blackwood Enterprises, not like this." Her voice softened, almost conspiratorially. "But you've changed, Henry. You don't just control a company anymore, you control the entire market. You've become bigger than I ever imagined." "And now you want a piece of it?" Henry finished for her, his voice steely. She looked at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I want more than just a piece, Henry. I want you back. I want you to remember who we were. You and me. We were unstoppable." His heart clenched, but he refused to let the pain show. The Henry she remembered was gone. That man had died the day she walked away. "No," he said flatly, shaking his head. "I don't remember that man anymore, and I won't let you manipulate me again." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the soft hum of the city outside. Amelia's gaze softened, but only for a second before it hardened again. "You may not remember, but I do, and it's not just the company I want, Henry. It's everything you built. You've become so powerful that it makes me wonder how much of that power was actually mine." Henry stiffened, his pulse quickening at the challenge in her voice. He had known she would come back for the company, but now she was pushing boundaries he didn't think she would dare to cross. "Everything I have I built on my own," he said, his voice low but filled with conviction. "I didn't need you to build this empire. I certainly don't need you now." Amelia's expression flickered with something close to frustration, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "We'll see about that." She turned to leave, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. "But don't think you've won, Henry. You haven't." As she walked out of the room, Henry felt a weight settle heavily in his chest. The past was never as far behind as he thought. Amelia was back, and she was just as dangerous as he remembered. But this time, he was prepared. That night, Henry sat alone in his penthouse apartment, staring out over the glittering city below. The world seemed so small from up here. His empire, his business, everything he had worked for, all reduced to a view. The quiet was comforting, but in the silence, his thoughts inevitably drifted back to Amelia. The woman who had left him broken. The woman who had been his everything and then destroyed him. The memories played in his mind like a loop. Her voice, her touch, the warmth of her skin. He had given her everything, and she had taken it, just like she had taken his trust, his love, and his heart. Yet somehow, in all the pain and betrayal, there was a flicker of something he couldn't erase. He had loved her. But he couldn't afford to love her again. Not now, not after everything. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Henry stood, his body stiff as he walked to the door. He opened it to find Sophia Carter, his assistant, standing there with a hesitant look on her face. She had been with him for 3 years now, the one person who had stayed by his side, offering him understanding and support when he had none to offer her in return. Sophia's eyes met his, concern written across her features. "I thought I might find you here," she said quietly. Henry didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped aside to let her in, his mind still heavy with thoughts of Amelia. Sophia walked into the living room, glancing at him over her shoulder. "I know you've been through a lot today, Henry, and I know the past is haunting you right now." He didn't look at her. He couldn't. He wasn't ready to face the truth, even if he had already admitted it to himself. He had changed, yes, but Sophia, she was the reason he had found a reason to believe in love again. "Sophia," he said, finally meeting her gaze. "Amelia is back." Her face softened in sympathy, but she didn't speak right away. Instead, she moved to stand beside him, her presence a quiet comfort. "I know," she said quietly. "I've been following the reports. I know she's trying to reclaim the company." "I don't need her to do that," Henry said sharply. "I don't need her for anything." Sophia's eyes softened. "I know you don't. But she still has a hold on you, Henry, even after all these years." He sighed heavily, rubbing his temples as if trying to erase the memories that were flooding his mind. "I thought I had buried everything. I thought I could move on. But Amelia? She's not the same person. And neither am I. I'm not the man I used to be, and I can't let her drag me back into that." Sophia stepped closer to him, gently placing a hand on his arm. "You've come so far, Henry, and I believe in you. I believe in what you've built. Not just the company, but the man you've become. You don't need her, and you don't need to fight your past alone." Her words were the calm he needed, the grounding force that had always been there. He knew, deep down, that Sophia was the one who had seen him for who he really was. The man beyond the empire, beyond the cold exterior. "I'm afraid," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Afraid that if I let her back in, I'll lose everything again." Sophia smiled softly, squeezing his arm. "You won't lose me, Henry. You won't lose yourself. You've already made your choice." He turned to her, his eyes searching hers, and in that moment, Henry knew. Sophia was the choice he had made, and no matter what happened with Amelia, no matter how much the past tried to resurface, he wouldn't let it define him again. "I've already lost her, Sophia," Henry said, his voice hoarse. "But I'm not going to lose you." Sophia's smile widened, and she leaned in, her voice steady and strong. "You never will." The game was only just beginning, and as Henry stared out over the city, the weight of the past and present pressed upon him, but one thing was certain: he was ready to face whatever came next. He was no longer afraid of the shadows of his past. He had finally found something worth fighting for, and this time he would not let it slip away. Section 3. The Hidden Motive. The following days felt like a slow, agonizing crawl, the kind of time-warped stretch where every second felt like an hour. The meetings at Blackwood Enterprises were more intense than ever, with the pressure of Amelia's reappearance hanging in the air like a thick fog. Henry couldn't escape her. He couldn't shake her from his mind, nor could he ignore the fact that her return meant trouble, not just for his empire, but for everything he had worked so hard to rebuild. Sophia noticed the shift in Henry immediately. Though he maintained his sharp, businesslike exterior, there was something different in the way he carried himself. The weight of the past had crept back into his life in a way he hadn't expected, and despite the iron walls he'd built around himself, the cracks were beginning to show. Sophia had seen Henry through his darkest days. After the betrayal, when he had pulled away from everyone and everything, he had shut himself off from the world, wrapped up in his empire. But now it was as though that darkness was threatening to consume him once more, and she couldn't help but feel the ache in her chest when she saw him like this. Her own feelings were complicated. She had known Henry for 3 years now. 3 years spent building more than just a professional relationship. She had become his confidant, the one person who had proven to him that there was still trust to be found, even in the most difficult circumstances. She had seen the quiet moments when his guard slipped, when he let his vulnerability peek through the cracks. She knew what it had taken for him to trust again, to let anyone close after what Amelia had done. But now it was clear to her that the past wasn't ready to let him go, and she feared that Amelia, with her charm and her power, might undo everything they had built. Sophia had been trying to keep her distance, trying to let Henry navigate his feelings without pushing too hard, but it was becoming increasingly clear that the situation wasn't just about the company. Amelia had an agenda, and Henry was walking right into her trap. That evening, as Henry sat in his office staring at the city skyline, he felt a weight on his chest that he couldn't ignore. The silence in his penthouse was deafening, and all he could hear was the echo of Amelia's voice, the way she had looked at him as if she knew exactly what buttons to push to bring him back to the man he used to be. He hadn't slept much the night before. The minutes between him and Sophia felt stretched and long, as though time itself had begun to drag. But tonight, as he gazed out at the lights of the city, it was clear to him Amelia was after more than just Blackwood Enterprises. She was after something deeper, a final attempt to regain control over him, to erase the part of his life he had built after her betrayal. Henry stood, pacing slowly in his office, his mind racing. He could feel the familiar weight of his decisions pressing down on him. The truth was, he had never truly gotten over Amelia. He had buried it under layers of work, of business meetings, of endless deals and negotiations. But now, as he faced her once again, those old feelings were coming to the surface, threatening to unravel everything he had built with Sophia. And that was when it hit him. Amelia wasn't here for just Blackwood Enterprises. She was here for him. She was here to reclaim the man she had left behind, the man who had once been at her feet, ready to give her everything. But that man didn't exist anymore. The real question was, did Amelia know that? The next day, Henry was in his office when he received the call. It was a call he knew would come. The voice on the other end was calm, but there was an edge to it, something that hinted at deeper motives. "Mr. Blackwood, we need to meet," said the voice, smooth but firm. It was Amelia. Henry's stomach tightened, but he masked it with his usual composure. "I assume this is about the merger." "You're a smart man, Henry," Amelia replied, her tone dripping with something he couldn't quite place. "But this is more than just business." There it was. She had gone from playing the businesswoman to something much more dangerous. She was making her move. "I'm not interested in playing games, Amelia," Henry said, his voice cool but firm. "You've had your chance. Now, if you're done wasting my time, I suggest we stick to the matter at hand." There was a moment of silence before Amelia spoke again, her voice now laced with something almost familiar. "You never could resist a challenge, Henry. I'm not here to talk business. I'm here to talk about us, about what we were. I think it's time we both acknowledge that." Henry's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the business talk he had expected. She was pulling him back into something far deeper, something that had been buried for far too long. "I've made my choices," Henry replied, his voice unwavering, "and I'm not interested in revisiting the past." "You never really left it though, did you?" Amelia said softly. "You still think about me. I know you do." Henry's grip tightened on the edge of his desk. She had always known how to get under his skin, but he refused to let her. Not again. "I'm not the man you knew, Amelia," he said, his voice firm but tinged with something darker. "That version of me died the day you left me, and I'm not going to let you drag me back into that hell." Amelia's silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When she finally spoke again, there was no trace of the woman he had once loved in her voice. She was all business now. "Fine," she said, her tone cold and final. "But know this, Henry, if you think I'll walk away quietly, you're wrong. I've got plans, and I always get what I want." The line went dead, and Henry was left standing there, his breath coming in shallow bursts. What had just happened? Sophia had been quietly watching Henry from her desk, her eyes never leaving him as he paced around the office. She had heard the phone call, and she knew exactly what it meant. Amelia was playing the long game. Sophia had never been one to shy away from difficult conversations, and this one, she knew, was going to be one of the hardest. She stood up and approached Henry's desk, watching him for a moment before speaking. "You're letting her get to you," she said softly, her voice calm, but her eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "Amelia's trying to break you down again. She knows exactly how to pull your strings." Henry stopped pacing and looked at her, his eyes dark with frustration. "You don't understand. You didn't see what she did to me, what she made me become." Sophia stepped forward, her hand gently resting on his arm. "I understand more than you think, Henry. I've watched you rebuild yourself from the ground up, and I've seen the man you've become. Don't let her make you doubt that. She doesn't deserve that power over you anymore." Henry met her gaze, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to take a breath. Sophia had been there for him when no one else had. She had been the one to stay by his side through everything, through the pain, through the betrayals, through the moments when he thought he could never trust again. Sophia wasn't just his assistant anymore. She was the one person who understood him, who had fought with him, not for his empire, but for him. "I'm afraid," Henry confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid that if I let her back in, I'll lose everything again." Sophia smiled softly, her hand still resting on his arm. "You won't lose me, Henry. I won't let you." For the first time in days, Henry felt a sense of relief, as though the storm inside him was beginning to calm. Sophia was right. He couldn't let the past control him. He couldn't let Amelia's games drag him back into that world of power and betrayal. "I'm done being a pawn in her game," Henry said firmly. "This time, I'm the one who calls the shots." The game had indeed begun again, but this time Henry wasn't going to play by Amelia's rules. He had something she didn't: the strength to move on, the courage to face the truth, and Sophia by his side. And this time, he would not lose. Section 4. Testing Sophia. The following days after Amelia's return were a blur of meetings, decisions, and the ever-present weight of old memories resurfacing. Henry had expected the intensity of the situation to subside, to return to the semblance of normalcy he had crafted over the past few years. But it seemed that with every passing hour, things were only escalating. Amelia was everywhere, on the news, in the boardrooms, whispering in the halls of Blackwood Enterprises. The air around Henry felt heavy, charged with a tension he couldn't quite shake. Sophia, too, could feel the strain in the office. She had always been in tune with Henry's moods more than anyone else, but lately it felt as though he was slipping away from her, slipping away from everything he had fought so hard to build. There were moments when he seemed like the man she knew, the man she admired. But there were also moments when the shadows of his past threatened to pull him back into a place he couldn't escape. That night, Henry sat in his office, surrounded by papers and financial reports that didn't seem to matter anymore. His mind kept drifting back to Amelia's words, her presence in the room, the haunting reminder of everything they had once shared and lost. Sophia had left him alone for the evening, letting him work through his thoughts, as she always did. She knew him well enough to give him space when he needed it, but tonight she couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease that had been gnawing at her since Amelia's arrival. She had seen the way Henry looked at the woman who had once been his everything. She had seen the flicker of something in his eyes, something old and familiar. As the hours passed and the night grew deeper, the door to Henry's office opened slowly, and Sophia stepped inside. She had been trying to avoid the confrontation that was slowly building, but she knew it was inevitable. Henry barely looked up, his eyes still fixed on the papers in front of him. "You're still here," he said softly, his voice tinged with exhaustion. Sophia smiled faintly. "I could ask you the same thing." She walked across the room, closing the door softly behind her before making her way to his desk. She stood there for a moment, watching him, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and understanding. "You haven't been yourself, Henry. I know it's hard, but you don't have to do this alone." Henry didn't answer immediately, his fingers absently flipping through the papers in front of him. He wanted to talk, to tell her what was really bothering him, but he wasn't sure where to start. He wasn't even sure if he knew how to explain what was happening inside him. "It's not just the business," Henry said finally, his voice quiet, almost broken. "It's her. She's back, Sophia. She's back, and I don't know how to deal with it." Sophia crossed her arms, leaning against the edge of his desk. "I know, but I think you need to talk about it, whatever it is you're holding in." Henry looked up at her then, his expression unreadable. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice tight. "I'm scared of what she might do. I'm scared of what I might do." Sophia frowned, stepping closer to him. "You're not that man anymore, Henry. You've changed. You've built something with your own hands, with your own strength. Don't let her take that from you." Henry's gaze softened, and he shook his head. "I don't know, Sophia. She was everything to me once. I trusted her with everything, and she broke me. Now, it feels like she's here to finish what she started, and I'm afraid I'll let her." Sophia's heart ached at the vulnerability in his eyes. She had seen this side of him before, the man who had been torn apart by betrayal, the man who had built walls around his heart in an attempt to protect himself. She wanted to reach out to him, to comfort him, but she knew better than to push too hard. He had to come to her when he was ready. Instead, she placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You don't have to face this alone. I'm here, Henry. I'm not going anywhere." Henry met her gaze, his eyes searching hers, and for a moment, it felt as if the weight of the world had lifted, if only for a second. But then the tension returned, creeping back into the room, pulling him away from her. He stood abruptly, pushing his chair back with a force that startled her. "I need to take care of this. I can't keep pretending everything's fine." Sophia watched as he walked to the window, his back to her now, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of the city lights outside. She knew what he was thinking, knew that the ghost of his past was looming over him, threatening to take everything he had worked for. But Sophia also knew that Henry was stronger than he realized. He had proven that to her time and time again, and she wasn't about to let Amelia take him down without a fight. "Henry," she said, her voice steady and calm, "what if I told you that you don't have to face this on your own?" He turned to look at her, his brow furrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Sophia said, taking a step toward him, "that I'm not just here for the business. I'm here for you. You've always been there for me, Henry. Now, let me help you." Henry's heart twisted in his chest as he watched her. He could see the sincerity in her eyes, the care she had for him, and it made something inside him shift. He walked back toward her slowly, his mind racing. Sophia wasn't just his assistant anymore. She was more. She had always been there, supporting him without question, without hesitation. He trusted her. And for the first time in a long while, Henry realized he wasn't afraid to trust her now. "I don't know how to deal with this," he said, his voice low, almost apologetic. Sophia smiled gently, her hand brushing against his arm as she took a step closer. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight, but I promise you, Henry, we'll get through this together. Whatever happens, I'm not going anywhere." For the first time in days, Henry allowed himself to breathe, his shoulders relaxing as the weight of his thoughts began to ease. He knew the battle was far from over. Amelia wasn't going to stop. But Sophia was his anchor. She was the one thing that kept him grounded, the one thing that reminded him there was still something worth fighting for. "I don't know what I'd do without you," Henry whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Sophia's smile softened as she took his hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "You'll never have to find out." The next day, the tension in the office was palpable. The team could sense something had shifted in the air between Henry and Amelia, but they didn't know the half of it. The game was only just beginning, and Amelia was playing to win. Sophia had been carefully watching Henry all morning, knowing that the pressure of the situation was beginning to take its toll. She had seen him react before, seen how he handled pressure, how he shut everyone out when things got too difficult. But today there was something different in his eyes. He wasn't running, and Sophia was determined to keep it that way. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city, Amelia called again. She had been persistent, each conversation more manipulative than the last. "I'm not giving up, Henry," she said, her voice smooth, calculated. "You know what we had. I haven't forgotten, and neither have you." But Henry had made up his mind. He wasn't the same man who had once been entranced by her manipulations. He was stronger now, and he had more than just power to protect. He had love, loyalty, and trust, things Amelia had never understood. "I'm not the man you once knew," he said, his voice steady. "You've already lost, Amelia. I won't let you destroy everything I've built again." Amelia's laugh on the other end of the line was cold. "We'll see about that, Henry." But as he ended the call, Henry felt a quiet sense of relief. The past couldn't touch him anymore, not with Sophia by his side. The battle was far from over, but Henry had finally made his choice. And this time, he wouldn't let anyone tear it apart. Section 5. Henry's Struggle. The weight of the past seemed to loom over Henry Blackwood like a storm cloud, dark and heavy, threatening to break at any moment. He couldn't remember a time when he had felt so out of control, so vulnerable. Amelia's return had shaken the foundations of everything he had built, both his empire and the life he had painstakingly constructed after the betrayal that had torn his world apart. Now, with her back in his life, the walls he had erected around his heart were beginning to crack, and Henry felt himself being pulled in a direction he didn't want to go. But there was another force fighting against the tide: Sophia Carter. She had become the anchor in his turbulent sea, the one person who remained constant, the one person he trusted completely. She was the reason he had kept moving forward, the reason he had started to rebuild his life after everything had fallen apart. She had been his rock, even when he hadn't allowed himself to admit it. Yet, as he sat in his penthouse apartment that night, Henry found himself torn between two worlds. Sophia and Amelia, past and present, trust and betrayal. He couldn't deny the pull he felt toward Sophia. She had been there for him through the darkest moments of his life, the moments when he had been nothing but a shadow of the man he once was. But with Amelia's return, the ghosts of the past had come back to haunt him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Amelia was still trying to control him. She had always been able to manipulate him, always able to make him question his own worth. And now she was back, trying to win him over again. Henry rubbed his temples, trying to shake off the growing headache that seemed to come with every passing thought of Amelia. He had never been one to let emotions get the better of him. He had always prided himself on his ability to compartmentalize, to separate business from personal feelings. But Amelia had always been different. She had been the one woman who had gotten under his skin, the one woman he had trusted with everything, only for her to betray him in the most devastating way possible. Now, as much as he hated to admit it, he was still haunted by the memories of what they had shared. He could still see her face, the way she had looked at him when she had walked out of his life. He could still hear her words echoing in his mind, the promises she had made, the love they had shared. And when he thought about it, it hurt just as much now as it had then. "I can't let her back in," Henry muttered to himself, the words falling heavy in the stillness of the room. He stood by the window, staring out at the city below, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts. Amelia was not the woman she once was. She was colder, more calculating. She didn't care about him anymore. She cared about winning. She cared about regaining control. And he couldn't let her do that again. But then there was Sophia. Sophia, the woman who had stayed by his side through it all. The woman who had never asked for anything in return. The woman who had seen him at his lowest and still chose to stand by him. The woman who had earned his trust in a way that no one else ever had. Yet, despite all of this, Henry still felt the weight of his past hanging over him like a dark cloud. He had to face the truth. He was scared that he would make the wrong choice, scared that if he allowed himself to fall back into the same patterns with Amelia, he would lose everything he had worked for. He was scared of trusting again, scared of allowing someone else to get that close, to have that much power over him. And that fear gnawed at him every day. The following morning, Henry sat in his office, staring blankly at the papers in front of him. The world outside the windows of Blackwood Enterprises was buzzing with activity, but inside his office, everything felt eerily still. His mind was elsewhere, caught between two women, two versions of his life that no longer seemed to fit together. Sophia walked into the office, her presence as steady and unshakable as always. She didn't say anything at first, just quietly took her seat across from him, her eyes studying him, knowing full well that something was off. She had known him long enough to recognize when he was struggling, when the weight of the world was pressing down on him. "I don't know what to do," Henry finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. It was the first time he had spoken those words aloud. He had always prided himself on being the one with all the answers, the one who could fix any problem, but this was different. Sophia looked at him, her eyes softening with understanding. "Henry," she said gently, "you don't have to make any decisions right now. Take your time. But whatever happens, know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Her words were simple, yet they carried so much weight. She didn't need to say more. The sincerity in her voice was enough. It was all Henry needed to hear. But still, the tension in his chest didn't ease. He couldn't ignore the storm of emotions swirling inside him. The business deals, the meetings, the mergers. None of it seemed important anymore. The only thing that mattered was what was happening inside him, what was happening to him. Henry had spent so many years building his empire, chasing success, trying to outrun the pain of the past. But now, standing at the crossroads of his life, he realized that no amount of money, no amount of success, would ever fill the emptiness he felt. He had never truly healed from what Amelia had done to him, and no matter how much he tried to bury it, the past was always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to break through. Sophia could see the turmoil in his eyes, and for a moment she wondered if she was losing him. He was slipping away, just like he had done before. The fear in his eyes was so palpable it almost hurt to look at him. She had seen this side of him, the broken man who had learned to live with the scars of the past. But now it felt like those scars were being reopened, like the pain was resurfacing, threatening to swallow him whole. But Sophia couldn't let that happen. She couldn't lose him. "I'm not afraid of the past, Henry," she said, her voice firm, yet gentle. "And you shouldn't be either. You've built something incredible, something that nobody can take away from you. But you need to stop running from your past. You need to face it, and you need to make peace with it. Only then can you move forward." Henry looked at her, his gaze searching her face for any sign of doubt. But there was none. She was standing by him, just as she always had, and in that moment, something inside him shifted. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that Sophia was the only one he could trust. The day dragged on, each moment feeling like an eternity. Henry's mind was a battleground, constantly torn between the pull of Sophia and the ghosts of Amelia's past. It was only when he received a call from his lawyer that the reality of the situation truly hit him. Amelia had made her move. She had filed a claim to take control of Blackwood Enterprises, demanding a seat on the board. Henry's blood ran cold. She was making her play. He could feel the tension in the room, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. This was it. This was the moment that would define everything. He had to decide. Would he give in to the past, or would he choose the future? Sophia stood by his side, her hand resting gently on his shoulder as she watched him process the information. She didn't need to say anything. She knew the decision was Henry's alone to make. But for the first time in a long time, Henry knew what he had to do. He knew he had to fight for what he had. The storm inside him had finally quieted, and Henry made his decision. "I'm not losing this again," he whispered, his voice firm. Sophia smiled softly, her heart swelling with pride. He had chosen, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like he was finally taking control of his own life. But Amelia's game was far from over, and the real battle was just beginning. In second 6, the offer she can't refuse. The world felt like it was spinning around Henry. The once solid, carefully constructed walls he had built to protect his heart and his empire were now trembling, cracking with the weight of Amelia's return. It wasn't just the merger, the power plays, or the cold business decisions that haunted him. It was her. Her presence had rekindled everything he had buried for so long: the betrayal, the promises, and the agony of being left behind. Henry leaned against the cool glass of his office window, watching as the city below thrived with life, oblivious to the storm that was brewing within the walls of Blackwood Enterprises. He had felt it from the moment Amelia re-entered his life. Her game was far from over. She wanted him back, and she wasn't just going to stop at winning him over. No, Amelia wanted everything. The call had come in just after dinner, when Henry had hoped for some respite. He was sitting with Sophia at his penthouse, both of them sharing a quiet evening after a whirlwind week of tense meetings and press conferences. They had been trying to ignore the elephant in the room, the reappearance of Amelia, but it seemed that with every hour that passed, the pressure built, and the air around them grew heavier. He picked up the phone, and it was her again. "Amelia?" "Henry," her voice purred on the other end of the line, a smooth melody of persuasion and control. "We need to talk, in person. I think you'll find it beneficial." Henry's jaw tightened as he held the phone to his ear. He knew what this was. It was another attempt, another calculated move in the game she had always played so well. "I don't think there's anything left to discuss, Amelia," Henry said, his voice firm. "You've made your intentions clear. I'm not interested." But Amelia wasn't one to take no for an answer. Her laugh on the other end was light, almost teasing, as if she knew a secret that Henry didn't. "Oh, I think you'll change your mind. Meet me at the usual spot tomorrow night. I'm sure you'll want to hear what I have to say." Before he could protest, she hung up, leaving him staring at the phone in his hand, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. What was she planning now? Henry set the phone down and looked over at Sophia, who had been watching him silently. He could tell she had heard the entire exchange, and now her gaze was filled with a mixture of concern and determination. "You're going to meet her?" Sophia asked, her voice steady but with a hint of worry. "I don't have much of a choice," Henry replied, rubbing his forehead. "She's playing a dangerous game, Sophia, and I have no idea what her next move is going to be." Sophia stood up from the couch and walked over to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Henry, you don't have to do this alone. You've already made it clear that you're not going to give in to her. Let me help." For a moment, Henry closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. He wanted to believe he could handle this on his own, but he knew better. He had tried to shut the door on the past, to move forward with Sophia by his side, but Amelia's return had thrown everything into chaos. "I don't know if I can win this battle, Sophia," he confessed, his voice raw. "She knows how to manipulate me. She always has." Sophia's expression softened, and she stepped closer to him. "You don't have to win this, Henry. You just have to stay true to yourself. You have me, and I won't let her take you away from me." Henry felt the knot in his chest loosen slightly at her words. Sophia was right. He didn't have to face Amelia alone. But facing her meant making a choice, one that would change everything. The next evening, Henry arrived at the luxurious rooftop restaurant where he had once shared many quiet, intimate moments with Amelia. The place was as opulent as ever, low golden light spilling across marble floors and soft jazz music playing in the background. It was a place that had once symbolized everything he had worked for, but now, as he walked inside, the space felt cold and foreign, as if it no longer belonged to him. Amelia was already seated at a corner table, looking as radiant as ever. Her dark hair framed her face in soft waves, and the red dress she wore clung to her in all the right places, the deep neckline revealing just enough of her flawless skin. She was the same woman he had once fallen for, the same woman who had shattered him with her betrayal. She looked up as Henry approached, her eyes lighting up with a mix of triumph and something darker. Something calculating. "Henry," she said, her voice smooth and seductive. "It's been a long time." Henry didn't respond immediately, instead pulling out the chair and sitting across from her, keeping his distance both physically and emotionally. "I thought we were done with all this, Amelia," he said, his voice steady but firm. "You've made your move, and I've made mine." Amelia's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "You're still the same stubborn man, aren't you? Always thinking you're in control? But let me remind you, Henry." She leaned forward, her eyes never leaving his. "Control is an illusion. I know how you think, how you feel, and if you're being honest with yourself, you know we're not finished. Not by a long shot." Henry's chest tightened. She was playing with him again, using all the old tactics she knew would make him question his own resolve. But this time, he wouldn't give in. He wouldn't let her manipulate him the way she had before. "I'm not interested in revisiting the past," Henry said firmly, his voice cold. "You've had your chance." Amelia's eyes darkened, and she shifted her posture, the change in her demeanor palpable. "You know, Henry," she said, her voice low and dangerous, "I'm not here for just you. I'm here for Blackwood Enterprises. You've spent years building this empire, and now I'm offering you a way to keep it all." Henry raised an eyebrow, the tension in the air thickening. "What are you talking about?" Amelia's smile widened as she leaned back in her chair. "I've spent a lot of time thinking, Henry, and I realize now that I don't just want you back. I want the whole damn thing. Blackwood Enterprises, I want it all." For a moment, Henry sat in stunned silence. He had suspected that Amelia had her sights set on more than just his heart, but this was something else entirely. She wasn't just playing with him, she was trying to take everything. "You're out of your mind," Henry said, his voice laced with disbelief. "You think I'm going to hand over my company to you after everything that's happened?" Amelia's expression hardened, but her gaze remained fixed on him. "I'm offering you a way out, Henry, a chance to walk away from the mess I've left behind. If you agree to my terms, I'll make sure the company stays intact, and you get to keep everything you've built. We both get what we want." Henry's jaw clenched, his mind racing. This was a power play. Amelia was using everything she knew about him to try and manipulate him back into her grasp. But he wasn't going to give in, not this time. "I don't need you, Amelia," Henry said, his voice steady. "And I don't need your offer. You've already taken enough from me." Amelia's lips curled into a tight smile. "Then maybe you're the one who's being foolish, Henry. You're in way over your head. If you won't play by my rules, I'll make sure you lose everything you've worked for." Henry stood abruptly, the weight of her words sinking in. She was playing a dangerous game, one that could cost him everything he had built. But he wasn't afraid of her anymore. "I don't need you," he repeated, his voice final, "and I won't let you take anything from me." Amelia didn't say another word as he turned and walked away, but Henry could feel the coldness of her gaze on his back, the danger of the game she had started. Section 7. Breaking the Illusion. The soft hum of the city outside Henry's office was drowned out by the relentless thoughts racing through his mind. It had been a week since he had met Amelia at the rooftop restaurant. Since then, the tension in the air seemed to multiply, the weight of the unspoken conflict growing heavier with each passing day. Every conversation, every interaction, seemed to carry the echo of Amelia's words. "If you won't play by my rules, I'll make sure you lose everything." But the threat hadn't shaken Henry as it once would have. He wasn't the man he used to be, the man who had once bent to Amelia's every will. He had changed, and now he had something more precious than his empire. He had Sophia. The truth was, Henry wasn't entirely sure what he was fighting for anymore. His company, his wealth, his past, or was it the woman who had stood by him through the darkest days? The woman who saw beyond the power, beyond the success? She was the calm in the storm of his life, the one person who had never asked for anything from him. She wasn't like Amelia. She didn't need him to be something he wasn't. Sophia loved him for who he truly was, scars and all. But now Amelia was back, trying to claw her way into the heart of everything he had built. She hadn't come back to him, no, that would have been too easy. She had come back to tear everything down. She wanted control. She wanted to wield the power she once had over him, and now she was using every weapon at her disposal to do so. The problem was, Henry wasn't sure if he could hold on to everything. The company, his future, and Sophia, and not lose himself in the process. The situation had come to a head when Amelia, in her usual manipulative fashion, had secretly sent Sophia old letters Henry had written to her when they were together. The letters were filled with raw emotion, unguarded words that he had written in a time when his heart was still open to her. He had poured everything into those letters. His love, his trust, his soul, and now they were being used as ammunition against him. Sophia had found the letters, her hands trembling as she read the painful words. She didn't say anything to him immediately. She couldn't. She was too hurt, too confused. How could he have loved her like that? How could he have trusted her after everything that had happened? And how could she continue to be by his side, knowing that there was still a part of him that hadn't fully healed? Had she ever been more than a shadow? The truth was, Sophia wasn't sure, and that uncertainty gnawed at her every time she looked at Henry. Could she really compete with the ghost of Amelia? She didn't want to compete. She never had. She loved Henry for who he was now, not for who he had been, not for the man Amelia had broken. But the past had a way of resurfacing, and it was a battle that Sophia wasn't sure she could win. The day after Sophia had discovered the letters, Henry was sitting in his office, trying to bury himself in the mountains of work that seemed to keep piling up. But he couldn't focus. His thoughts kept drifting back to the woman who had once held his heart, and the woman who now held it again, despite all his efforts to keep her at bay. He had seen Sophia earlier in the day. She had barely said a word. The weight of her silence had felt suffocating, and Henry couldn't help but wonder if he was losing her. He couldn't bear the thought of losing her. Not now. Not after everything. He knew he had to do something to fix it. He couldn't let Amelia win, he couldn't let her tear him apart again, and he couldn't let her take Sophia from him. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his reverie. It was an email from his lawyer. Amelia was escalating the situation. She had filed for an emergency meeting with the board of directors, and she had a plan to oust Henry from his own company. This was it, the final battle. Henry knew he couldn't afford to back down now. Amelia had to be stopped, and he wasn't going to let her get away with this. But his thoughts quickly turned back to Sophia. He couldn't ask her to stand by him when she was already facing her own battle. How could he be the man she needed if he couldn't even resolve his own issues? As the clock ticked on, Henry felt the tension building inside him. He couldn't sit still any longer. He had to do something. He had to make things right with Sophia. Later that evening, Henry found himself standing outside Sophia's apartment, his heart pounding in his chest. He had spent hours rehearsing what he would say, but now that he was here, all the words seemed to fall away. Sophia had been avoiding him for days. She hadn't answered his calls, and she hadn't been to the office. Henry knew she was hurt, but he didn't know how to fix it. He didn't know how to make her see that he loved her. The door opened before he could knock. Sophia stood in the doorway, her eyes wary, but there was something else there, something that made Henry's heart skip a beat. "He came," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had to," Henry replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't let you go, Sophia. Not like this." Sophia stepped aside to let him in, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. They stood in the living room, the silence between them suffocating. But Henry wasn't going to wait anymore. He had to speak his truth. "Sophia," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to put you in the middle of this mess. But I'm asking you, no, I'm begging you to give me a chance. Don't let Amelia tear us apart." Sophia looked up at him, her eyes filled with both love and pain. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she stepped closer to him, her hand brushing against his arm, and for a moment, Henry felt as though the world had stopped. "I don't want to lose you, Henry," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "but I don't know if I can keep doing this. I don't know if I can keep fighting for something that feels like it's slipping away." "I'm not going anywhere," Henry said, his voice firm and certain. "I promise you, Sophia, this time I'm not letting go." Sophia's gaze softened, and for the first time in days, she reached out and touched him. Just a simple touch, but it was enough to send a wave of relief crashing over him. It was a promise, a sign that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way through this together. "I don't know what happens next," she said, her voice trembling, "but I want to find out with you." Henry's heart swelled with emotion, and in that moment, everything felt like it was falling into place. He had a choice, and for the first time, he knew exactly what he needed to do. Later that night, after hours of long conversations and difficult decisions, Henry found himself sitting in his office, staring at the latest documents Amelia had sent over. She wasn't going to make this easy, but then again, Henry had never played easy. His phone rang and he answered without looking at the caller ID. "Yes?" It was Sophia. "We'll fight this together," she said, her voice steady. "I'm with you, Henry. No matter what happens next, we're in this together." And for the first time in a long while, Henry smiled. They were in this together. He wasn't alone anymore. He didn't have to face Amelia's games alone. He had Sophia, and with her by his side, he knew they could overcome anything. But the real battle was just beginning, and Amelia wasn't going to back down without a fight. Section 8. Sophia's Doubt. The days following Henry's confession had been like walking on a tightrope. Every step was uncertain, every moment filled with an emotional pull that threatened to send her plummeting into a chasm of fear and doubt. Sophia hadn't expected things to feel this complicated. She had always believed in their connection, in the strength of their bond. But now, after everything that had happened, after Amelia's return she sat alone in her apartment one evening, the dim light from the street lamps casting a warm glow over her small living room. Her mind was racing, but the questions that kept haunting her were simple. Can I trust him? Can I trust us? The letters. The secret pain Henry had carried with him for so many years. Amelia's words, the way she had manipulated him, she had seen it all. Sophia had tried to brush it off, to bury her feelings of jealousy and insecurity, but it was hard. It was hard when Amelia's ghost seemed to linger in every conversation, every shared moment between them. The day Henry had told her about the letters had been a turning point. He had confessed, openly and honestly, that he had once loved Amelia deeply. He had trusted her completely, and now the woman who had torn him apart was back, trying to worm her way into his life again. For the first time in their relationship, Sophia felt like an outsider. She wasn't the woman who had a claim on Henry's heart. No, that woman was Amelia, and the reminder of that fact left her feeling cold. She had tried to talk to Henry about it, tried to explain how the weight of the past was pulling her away from him, but every time she attempted to bring it up, he seemed distant, as though he was afraid to face the truth. He was still fighting his own battles, and Sophia was caught in the crossfire. She stood up from the couch and walked to the window, gazing out at the bustling city below. The world was moving, people were living their lives, and here she was, stuck in her own confusion, wondering if she had made a mistake by allowing herself to fall for a man who was so deeply scarred by his past. The doorbell rang, pulling her out of her thoughts. She froze for a moment before walking toward the door, unsure of who could be there. When she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. It was Henry. His usual composed demeanor was gone, replaced by a vulnerability she hadn't seen in him before. His eyes were filled with concern, and his posture was tense. Sophia's heart softened, but a knot still remained in her chest. How could she trust him after everything that had happened? "Can we talk?" Henry asked quietly, his voice betraying the weight of the moment. Sophia nodded, stepping aside to let him in. She didn't speak as he walked past her, the silence between them hanging thick in the air. As soon as the door clicked shut behind them, Henry turned to face her, his expression searching as though trying to find the right words. "I know things have been difficult," Henry began, his voice soft but urgent. "I know you're hurting, and I can see that I've made things worse by not being honest with you. But I need you to understand something. Amelia is part of my past. She will always be a part of it, but she doesn't control me anymore. She can't." Sophia swallowed hard, her chest tightening as she processed his words. She wanted to believe him, she really did, but the doubts kept creeping in, like tendrils of fear she couldn't shake. "I'm not sure I can believe you, Henry," Sophia admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I want to, but every time I look at you, I feel like I'm competing with someone who doesn't even exist anymore. And I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending like I'm not terrified of losing you to the woman who broke you." Henry's eyes softened and he took a step closer, reaching out to gently take her hands in his. The warmth of his touch sent a wave of comfort through her, but it didn't erase the hurt she felt. "I'm not asking you to pretend, Sophia," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I'm asking you to trust me. Trust that what I feel for you is real. I can't change the past, but I can give you my future. And that future is with you. I'm not asking you to forget about Amelia, but I am asking you to trust me when I say that she doesn't have the power to hurt me anymore." Sophia closed her eyes, breathing deeply as she processed his words. She wanted to believe him, she really did, but the scars that Amelia had left on him were so deep, so profound, that she wasn't sure if she could handle the fallout from it all. "I want to believe you, Henry," Sophia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But I don't know if I can keep putting myself through this. I don't know if I can keep fighting for you when it feels like I'm fighting against everything you've ever loved." Henry's grip tightened on her hands, and he stepped closer, his forehead resting against hers. "Sophia, I know this is hard. I know you're scared, and I know you don't trust me right now. But I'm asking you to give me a chance. I need you to trust that I'm not going to let you go. Not now, not ever." For a long moment, Sophia remained still, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Her heart was racing in her chest, torn between the love she felt for him and the fear of losing herself in the process. Could she trust him again? Could she let herself fall deeper into a relationship that had already hurt her so much? Finally, she pulled away slightly, looking into his eyes with a mixture of love and uncertainty. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, Henry," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can keep fighting for us when I'm not sure if we're fighting for the same thing." Henry closed his eyes, as if the weight of her words had physically hurt him. He stepped back slightly, giving her the space she needed, but his gaze never left hers. "I understand," he said quietly. "I can't force you to stay, but I need you to know that you are my choice, Sophia. I don't need the past anymore, I need you." The sincerity in his voice made her heart ache, and for a moment, all the walls she had built up came crashing down. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to believe in their future. But the fear was still there, gnawing at her, whispering that love was never as simple as it seemed. Sophia stepped back and crossed her arms, her fingers tracing the fabric of her sleeve. "Then why does it feel like you're still holding on to the past?" she asked quietly, her voice filled with hurt. Henry's eyes softened, and he took a deep breath, as if gathering the strength to face the truth. "Because I'm not perfect, Sophia," he said, his voice raw. "I've made mistakes. I've hurt you, and I'm sorry for that. But I'm not the man I was with Amelia. I don't need her. I don't need the past. I need you. I need you to believe that I'm here, with you, and that I'm not going anywhere." Sophia's eyes filled with tears, and she fought to keep them from spilling over. She had loved him so much, had given him so much of herself, and yet there was a part of her that still felt like she was losing him, losing herself. "I want to believe you," she said, her voice breaking. "I want to trust that we have a future, but I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can keep fighting this fight if it means losing myself." Henry stepped forward, his hands gently cupping her face, his thumb brushing away the single tear that escaped down her cheek. "You won't lose yourself, Sophia. I won't let that happen. I swear, I won't let you go." For a long time they stood there, their foreheads pressed together, the weight of their unspoken feelings hanging in the air between them. This was the moment when the truth would either tear them apart or bring them closer together. Sophia's heart swelled with emotion as she finally whispered, "I want to believe in us, Henry, but I need you to show me, I need you to prove that you won't let the past control us." And Henry nodded, his eyes filled with a determination she had never seen before. "I will, Sophia. I will prove it every day. You are my future." As she looked up into his eyes, Sophia felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could make it through this. But the battle wasn't over yet. The past had a way of clawing its way back, and Amelia's hold over Henry was far from broken. Section 9. Amelia's last move. The weight of the world seemed to press down on Henry Blackwood's shoulders as he sat in his office, The looming challenge that was Amelia Voss felt even more threatening now that the stakes had been raised. After weeks of mind games, manipulation, and power plays, Amelia had one final card to play. She had taken her fight to the boardroom, and Henry had a sinking feeling that this time the game would be different. Sophia was in his office earlier that morning, her soft gaze filled with both concern and strength. Their conversation had been about the future, their future. It had been a moment of peace amidst the chaos that Amelia had created. But as much as Henry wanted to hold on to that peace, he knew the battle wasn't over. Amelia was relentless, and this time she wasn't playing games. She was going for the kill. Henry's mind raced. The meeting with the board of directors was scheduled for the afternoon, and Amelia was planning to bring in her ammunition. She had no intention of losing this time. But what she didn't understand was that Henry wasn't the same man he once was. The walls Amelia had built around his heart had crumbled, and Sophia was the reason for that. A knock on the door broke his thoughts. Without waiting for a response, the door opened, and Emma Hayes stepped inside. She had been his loyal assistant for years, and despite the tension of recent events, Henry felt a sense of comfort whenever she was near. "Henry," Emma said, her voice laced with concern, "the board meeting is in 2 hours. Are you ready?" Henry nodded, but didn't speak for a moment. His fingers drummed rhythmically on the desk as he thought about Amelia's next move. "I don't know if I'm ready, Emma," he said, his voice low. "Amelia is playing a game that I'm not sure I can win." Emma leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms. "You've been through worse, Henry. You know how to fight. But this time, it's different. I've seen what Amelia is capable of, and I know what she's trying to do." Henry met her eyes. "She's trying to take Blackwood Enterprises from me, but she's doing more than that. She's trying to tear apart everything I've worked for, everything I've built with Sophia." Emma's expression softened. "Sophia is stronger than you think, Henry. She's not going to let Amelia destroy what you two have, but you need to make a choice." Henry frowned. "What do you mean?" Emma stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've been holding back, Henry. Holding back from Sophia because of your past with Amelia. It's time to let go of the past once and for all. If you want to win this, you have to choose Sophia, and you have to do it now." Henry's chest tightened at the mention of Sophia's name. He had promised her that he would always choose her, but the weight of his responsibilities, the years of betrayal, and the pressure from Amelia had clouded his judgment. He had to stop holding on to the past. He had to let it go. "I know what I have to do," Henry said, his voice filled with newfound determination. "Thank you, Emma. You've always known when to push me." Emma smiled faintly. "I'm just telling you what you already know. But I've also seen how much you care for her. Don't let anything or anyone come between that." Henry nodded, his resolve solidifying. The door to his past had been closed for years, but Sophia had opened it again, and now it was time to walk through that door, leave the past behind, and finally build the future they both deserved. The boardroom was packed when Henry arrived. The room buzzed with the low murmur of conversations, but as soon as Henry entered, the atmosphere shifted. The tension was palpable. Amelia stood at the front of the room, her sharp gaze scanning the faces of the board members, a quiet confidence radiating from her. She was ready for battle. "Mr. Blackwood," she greeted him with a polite nod, but there was something in her eyes, a spark of challenge that sent a chill down Henry's spine. "I'm glad you could make it. I was beginning to wonder if you would show up." Henry didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked to his seat at the head of the table, his gaze never leaving Amelia. He could feel the weight of the room on his shoulders, but he wasn't going to let her control this. This time the power was his. The meeting began, but Henry couldn't focus on the mundane business topics being discussed. His thoughts kept drifting back to the moment he had promised Sophia that he would never let her go, the promise he intended to keep. As the conversation shifted toward the proposed merger with Amelia's company, Henry knew that things were about to get serious. This was where Amelia had planned her final move, her ultimate test of his resolve. "Mr. Blackwood," one of the board members began, glancing at the proposal Amelia had presented. "We've been reviewing the terms of the merger, but there are still some concerns about the future leadership of Blackwood Enterprises. It's clear that your vision for the company is somewhat divergent from Amelia's." Henry took a deep breath, but before he could speak, Amelia cut in. "It's simple. Amelia said, her voice sweet but laced with venom. "I believe that under my leadership, Blackwood Enterprises will reach heights that Mr. Blackwood could never imagine. He's been running the company for years, but let's face it, he's been distracted, and now he's too emotionally involved with his assistant to make the tough decisions that are required to keep this company on top." A murmur rippled through the board members, but Henry didn't flinch. He could feel the pressure building, but he knew what he had to do. "Amelia," Henry said, his voice calm but filled with authority, "you've been playing this game for far too long, but the truth is, you don't have a claim on this company anymore. I've built it from the ground up, and I'm not about to let you tear it apart just because you think you can manipulate me." Amelia's smile didn't falter, but there was a coldness to it. "You think I'm the one manipulating things? You're more naive than I remember. You've already lost this battle, Henry. Sophia will never be enough to keep you in control." At the mention of Sophia's name, Henry's eyes flickered. The cold grip that Amelia had once held on him was now replaced with a deep sense of clarity. Amelia wasn't the woman he loved. She never had been. Sophia was the one who had stayed by his side, the one who had seen through his armor and loved him for who he was. "Sophia's more than enough," Henry said, his voice filled with unwavering certainty. "And if you think you can use her to get to me, you're wrong. This is my company, my future, and I choose who I let in." Amelia's expression faltered, just for a moment, but Henry saw it. He had struck a nerve. She wasn't going to win this time, not when he had something worth fighting for. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur, but Henry could feel the tide shifting. He had made his stance clear. Amelia's hold on the company, on him, was slipping. She couldn't break him anymore. As the meeting wrapped up and the board members filed out of the room, Amelia remained seated, her gaze fixed on Henry. For a moment, they stood across from each other, the past between them like a chasm that could never be crossed. "You've changed," Amelia said softly, her voice tinged with a mixture of admiration and bitterness. "You're not the same man I left behind." Henry didn't respond right away. He looked at her, the woman who had once been his everything, but who now seemed like nothing more than a distant memory. "I'm not the man you thought I was, Amelia. I'm better than that. And this company? It's mine. You'll never have it." Amelia's eyes narrowed, but she didn't speak. Instead, she stood up, straightening her jacket. "We'll see about that," she said, her voice icy. "But know this, Henry, you haven't seen the last of me." Henry didn't flinch. "No, Amelia, you've lost, for good." As she walked out of the room, Henry felt a sense of finality wash over him. The past was gone. Sophia was right. He had to choose her, and he had. He wasn't going to let Amelia take anything from him anymore. He had already found what mattered most. Section 10, Letting Go of the Past. The day had arrived. The storm had passed, and the air felt different now. It had been weeks since Henry had confronted Amelia, since he had told her that he would no longer be manipulated by the past. Yet, he still couldn't shake the feeling that there was one final piece of unfinished business that had yet to be resolved. The board meeting had been the climax. The declaration that Amelia's hold on Blackwood Enterprises was finally over had felt like a victory, a long-awaited win that Henry had worked tirelessly for. But with it came a new kind of uncertainty. It wasn't just the future of the company that was at stake. It was his future with Sophia. When he left the meeting that day, his mind had been a swirl of emotions. Amelia had always been a constant in his life, even when she wasn't physically there. For years, he had clung to her memory, believing that she was the woman he had been meant to be with. But as the days passed, Henry began to realize that his world had shifted. It wasn't Amelia who had broken the walls he had built around his heart. It had been Sophia. Sophia had become his anchor. She had shown him a love he had never known, a love that made him feel seen, not for his success, not for his power, but for who he truly was. And for the first time in his life, Henry knew what it meant to be loved, without conditions. The thought of losing her now seemed impossible. Yet, there was still that lingering doubt, that shadow of the past, that haunted him whenever he looked at her. Could he truly let go of everything that had happened with Amelia? Could he move forward, with Sophia by his side, knowing how much of his heart still belonged to the past? It was late in the evening when Henry finally found himself walking towards Sophia's apartment. He had spent the day in meetings, tying up loose ends at Blackwood Enterprises, and dealing with the fallout from Amelia's failed attempt to regain control. The exhaustion weighed on him, but it wasn't the work that lingered in his mind. It was Sophia. How would she react to the changes? How could he make her see that he was truly committed to her? As he approached her door, the sounds of the bustling city seemed distant. All that mattered now was what was about to unfold between them. He had already made his decision, now he had to prove it. The door opened before he could knock. Sophia stood there, looking every bit the woman who had stolen his heart. Her eyes softened when she saw him, but there was a wariness in her gaze that he hadn't noticed before. "Henry," she said, her voice a mixture of relief and apprehension. "You're here." "I'm here," Henry replied, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I needed to see you." Sophia stepped aside, allowing him to enter. As he walked past her, Henry couldn't help but notice the way she hesitated, as if she was unsure whether to embrace him or keep her distance. Was she still unsure of him? Once inside, he turned to face her. The tension in the room was palpable, as if the weight of everything that had transpired was hanging in the air between them. He could feel it, her hesitation, her doubt, and most importantly, her fear. "Sophia?" Henry began, his voice low and filled with sincerity. "I know that I've hurt you. I know that I've carried around a past that has affected both of us. But I need you to know, I'm done. I'm done with Amelia. I'm done with the past. And I'm—" Sophia's eyes searched his face, her expression unreadable. She took a step back, wrapping her arms around herself as if bracing herself for something. "I don't know if I can believe that, Henry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, keep giving you my heart, when I know that part of you still belongs to her." Henry's heart clenched at her words. She didn't trust him, and who could blame her? He had spent so many years wrapped up in the past, fighting for something that had never been real. But Sophia, she was real. Their love was real. "Look at me, Sophia," Henry said gently, stepping closer. "You have to know that I'm not the man I was. Amelia is no longer a part of my life. She's a ghost, a shadow of what I thought was love. And I've realized that she never truly loved me, not like you do. You're the one who showed me what love really is." Sophia shook her head, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, Henry. I don't know if I can keep trying to hold on to something that feels like it's slipping through my fingers. I've seen how hard you fought for your company, for your empire, but I'm not sure I can keep competing with the past. With her—" Henry's chest tightened. She wasn't competing with anyone. She was the only one who mattered. He reached out, cupping her face in his hands, and forced her to meet his eyes. "You're not competing with anyone, Sophia. There's no one else. Only you." For a long moment they stood there in silence, the weight of his words hanging in the air. He could see the battle within her, the fear, the vulnerability, the uncertainty, but beneath it all he could see the flicker of hope. Hope that they could make this work, hope that she could find it within herself to trust him again. "I love you, Sophia," Henry whispered, his voice breaking, "and I will do whatever it takes to prove that to you." Sophia's eyes welled with tears, and she stepped into his arms, her body trembling against his. Henry held her tightly, as if the very act of holding her could erase all the doubts, all the pain that had kept them apart. This was it. There was no going back now. He had made his choice. Sophia was his future. "I love you too," Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible. I need time, Henry. I need to know that you're really here, that you're really mine, and that the past won't come back to haunt us." "I'll prove it to you every single day," he promised, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "I'll show you that I'm here for you, and I always will be." They stood in each other's arms for what felt like an eternity, the world outside fading away as they finally allowed themselves to be present in the moment. This was the beginning of their future, and for the first time in his life, Henry was ready to embrace it without hesitation. Later that evening, after they had talked through their fears and their hopes, Henry and Sophia sat side by side on her couch. The evening had been filled with quiet moments of tenderness, shared smiles, soft laughter, and a renewed sense of connection. They both knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were ready to face it together. As the night drew to a close, Henry stood up and turned to Sophia. "I'm not going anywhere," he said softly. and neither are you." Sophia smiled, her heart swelling with love for the man who had once been so unreachable. "I know," she replied, reaching for his hand. "I'm here with you, Henry, always." The next day, Henry returned to his office, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Amelia's power was broken, and Blackwood Enterprises was finally secure. But more than that, he had Sophia by his side, the woman who had shown him the true meaning of love. He had made it through the storm, and now he was ready to rebuild, to create a future that was his own, a future that didn't belong to the past, to Amelia, or to anyone else. It belonged to him and Sophia. And for the first time in his life, Henry Blackwood was truly free. The power of letting go and choosing love. Henry Blackwood had been a man of walls, a fortress of solitude and pain, keeping everyone at arm's length to protect himself from a past that had betrayed him. For years, he carried the weight of that past like a burden too heavy to bear, never allowing anyone to get close. Amelia Voss, the woman who had once been the center of his world, had shattered his heart with a betrayal that had left him questioning everything he had ever believed about love. But over time, Henry learned something profound. Letting go of the past didn't mean forgetting it. It meant choosing to move forward. And in Sophia Carter, he found the strength to do just that. When he finally faced the truth, that his heart no longer belonged to the woman who had broken him, but to the one who had stood by him, understood him, and loved him for who he truly was, he realized that love was never about holding on to something that no longer served you. It was about choosing to let go, to trust, and to build something new. Sophia was the light that had shone through the darkness of his past. She had healed the wounds that Amelia had left behind, and, in doing so, she had given him the freedom to embrace a future that was no longer defined by betrayal, but by hope, love, and loyalty. The road to this realization had been long and filled with obstacles. From the manipulations of Amelia, the uncertainty in their relationship, and the painful memories that haunted Henry, it seemed like their love story might never reach its happy ending. But they had overcome every challenge, every doubt, and every obstacle that had come their way. And now, standing at the precipice of their future, they knew that they were ready to face whatever came next, together. In the end, it was clear that the greatest power was not in controlling the world around them. It was in choosing to trust, to love, and to forgive. Henry had finally forgiven himself for the mistakes of his past, and in doing so, he had made room for the love that Sophia offered him. And Sophia, despite the doubts that had once clouded her heart, had chosen to trust in him, to believe that the love they shared was real and worth fighting for. There are times in life when we hold on to past pain, past betrayals, and past heartbreaks so tightly that we forget how to live fully in the present. We carry the weight of memories, often letting them shape the way we see ourselves and others. But the truth is, love is not meant to be something that ties us to the past. It is meant to be something that frees us, that helps us move forward, and that shows us that the future is worth living for. In Henry and Sophia's story, we see the importance of letting go, of shedding the old scars and choosing to heal. Henry had to let go of the anger, the hurt, and the betrayal that had defined his relationship with Amelia. He had to forgive himself for the mistakes he had made, for the trust he had given to the wrong person, and once he did, he was able to truly see Sophia, to truly love her for who she was, and to embrace the future they could create together. Sophia, on the other hand, had to learn to trust again. She had been hurt before, and her heart had been broken, but she didn't let that define her. She didn't let it close her off from the possibility of love. Instead, she chose to believe in what she and Henry could have, despite the obstacles they faced. Their love wasn't about perfection. It was about vulnerability, about choosing to trust in someone even when you're scared, and about letting go of the things that hold you back. The journey of letting go is not easy, and it's not without pain. But in the end, it is the only way to truly embrace what lies ahead. You can't move forward if you're still holding on to something that's already gone. Sophia and Henry's journey is one that reminds us all that love is not just a feeling, it's a choice. It's a decision to show up every day, to be vulnerable, and to let go of the things that no longer serve us. It's about choosing to trust in someone even when the past tries to pull us back. And that's exactly what Henry and Sophia did. They chose each other. They chose to move forward together, to build a future that was no longer clouded by past hurts, but filled with the promise of what could be. For Henry, That meant letting go of the control that had defined his life for so long. He had spent years building walls around his heart, afraid to let anyone in. But Sophia showed him that love wasn't about control. It was about connection. It was about trusting that the person beside you would be there to catch you when you fall, and to help you rise when you need it. For Sophia, that meant learning to trust again, to allow herself to be loved without fear. She had been hurt before, but she didn't let that stop her from embracing the love that Henry offered her. She chose to believe in him, in their love, and in their future. Together, they proved that love is not just about the good times, but about weathering the storms and coming out stronger on the other side. And in the end, their love story was not just about finding each other, it was about healing and growth. If you believe in the power of love, trust, and second chances, then join us on this journey of healing and growth. Henry and Sophia's story is one that shows us that no matter how many times we fall, love has the power to lift us back up. If this story has touched your heart, we would love for you to share it with others who may need to hear it. Like, comment, and share this video with those who believe that love is worth fighting for. Let's spread the message that no matter what life throws our way, love always has the power to heal, to restore, and to create something beautiful. Stay tuned for more stories of love, hope, and resilience. Subscribe to Millionaire Love Stories and become a part of a community that believes in the power of love to change lives. Your story could be the next one we share.